Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting conversation with Jonathan Mentor. And Jonathan, you're not only the CEO and founder of Successment, but you speak quite extensively, actually won a number of awards, which I'm going to ask you to go into here a little bit, on the revenue operation side, or as you put it, the revenue science side of the business. And you're actually coming out with a book this next year. And so a lot of your mentality we're gonna be talking about today. And the overarching theme that we're going to be talking about is really what underlies it is, what is revenue creation and where do we get the most of it? And we think it's from chasing a bunch of new logos, right? We spend a lot of time chasing new logos, right? Where the revenue operations side of the business isn't focused as much as like the marketing and sales department is always on that side, right? So we're gonna uncover that in a big way here today. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit more on your background.
Sure. I'm Jonathan Mentor, dad. Okay, born and raised in New York. I now live in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. And based on my work here and in the United States and in Latin America, I was nominated for the United Nations World Summit Awards representing Dominican Republic in 2024. I am working in partnership with a publisher to come up with a book on revenue operations, RevOps Science next year. I've been in growth, marketing, and sales operations for about 15 years now. I've worked with some of the biggest name startups coming out of some of the big accelerators in the world, Techstars, Pharrell's Black Ambition, Start Out, Build in Tulsa in the Tulsa startup ecosystem, Rice in the Atlanta tech ecosystem. I coined my intellectual property, RevOps Science, and RevOps Science shows startups and large enterprise organizations how to build 5 pillars of annual recurring revenue. And my specialty, for those listening, is operations that are trying to scale from their first 500,000 to $1 million, and from their first $1 million to $10 million annual recurring revenue.
Fantastic. That's a great goal. That's a good step on the way to becoming a unicorn. That's what we all want, right? So I'm going to just ask, if you wouldn't mind, there's underlying all of this is the ability to scale like you're talking about. The underpinning in the B2B world is that it's a relationship-based business. And one of the things that's happening in that relationship is the buyer's waiting longer and longer to want to talk to us. And they're trusting us less and less. In fact, there was a study that came out just over a year ago that cited that 74% of B2B buyers actually don't trust the customer evidence that we present to them. I just want to set the stage in your mind in creating this, 10 million in annual recurring revenue, which is a fantastic goal for startups. Where does trust play into all of this? And why do we want to talk about that?
I think that when I think about startup growth and I think about the revenue operation, it really starts on identifying what those 5 pillars are. And trust is something that is very hard to measure. So since it's hard to measure, the more scientific minded of us marketers and sales professionals, it tends to get like, well, that's a further goal. That's something that we're going to do in the future. That's not something that we're going to focus on now because we need immediate results. But one thing can be true while another thing is true. And that's why I always think about growth in parallel, right? You set goals on the clock and you set goals on the calendar. Goals on the clock are going to be metrics, and you need to ladder up to things like, okay, we can predictably and responsibly say, yes, we are building trust via these metrics. And those metrics, if you think about a ladder, Steve, they ladder up to revenue outcomes. But one can't really operate without the other because you're not going to get revenue outcomes unless you have a revenue engine building there. So in terms of building trust, it's one of the things that startups especially need to start thinking about really, really early in the game, because there are a lot of technology companies that come and go. And B2B buyers are becoming more savvy about the decisions that they're making in terms of their long-term relationship and technology partners. So building trust is actually paramount. Our job is to stay competitive and to stay creative in terms of how we are measuring that trustability.
Well, okay, so trust, absolutely foundational, right? It's so important to our overall growth strategy. How do we overcome the skepticism? How do we establish credibility in the market, especially where we're new, we're startups, right?
I think it has a lot to do with the landing team. The landing team is really, really important because they're going to come with a network and a community of their own that are going to have supported their work when they were maybe coming out of corporate or in some cases coming out of college. And the experience that that person and that landing team bring to the table is going to be paramount. Early successes are going to be really, really important. And it's like a chicken and the egg. How do I get my first success with that? Well, that comes with getting creative and taking a lot of risks, right? So you can offer a program in beta, use that beta with very special circumstances in order to get the opportunity to build the data, build your skin in the game, build your relationships in order to move forward. And the third way that I've seen it happen is through really big partnerships, right? When a startup aligns itself with big name accelerators like your Y Combinators or your Techstars, it adds a little bit of brand equity that you might not otherwise have. And the networks that come out of those big accelerators come with other big name industry leaders, tastemakers, people with the keys to the doors, right? When you build those relationships via having the brand equity, having come out of some accelerator that has global recognition, it can really ease some of the tension in terms of getting your first opportunities. And a word to the wise for those that are really early in the game thinking about revenue is that your first wins, true to kind of what I alluded to before, your first wins on the clock, they might not be revenue outcomes, right? You might be beta testing with somebody in order to gain data. That way you can use that to then leverage true sales. In the way that I formulate a go-to-market and a revenue operation strategy is those things all need to be accounted for because you might not get revenue tomorrow, but if you don't get a success tomorrow, you're not going to get revenue next month.
Right. You know, so you've mentioned revenue operations a number of times now, and your book coming out is Revenue Science. Why revenue science? What's the difference between, or the mentality or the mindset that you want us to have different between revenue operations, which we all think we know what that is, right? And revenue science. What's the difference there?
So to me, it's not a new thing. Let me make that clear. I'm not that brilliant. I'm not that bright. It's a concept that's been talked about for a while, but I think that RevOps captures it the most accurately nowadays. And so in order to unpack how to deploy RevOps, I developed RevOps Science. And that means revenue operations because it comes from the revenue generation comes out of the, the, uh, the way that the operation is formed on the five pillars generates your revenue. Let's break down what those five pillars are so you can get a robust recurring revenue engine, right? Number one is generating awareness. This is its own thing, right? Generating awareness. People need to become aware of you, the solution that you bring, or what it is that you're all about. From generating awareness, you need to move on to the second pillar, which is generating engagement. Now I know who you are, what you do. What is the offer to me that makes me want to go with you rather than your competitors? The hook, the one-liner, the pilot program, the introductory offer. Then you have to move on to understanding how to enable sales. Sales just don't happen, they get enabled. The kind of conversation you're going to have when you're describing your business and the kind of conversation you're going to have when you're closing a sale is completely different. And then in that middle, you need to be careful about separating those three content pillars. Where the money happens is always in the last two pillars of the revenue operation. That's where recurring revenue happens. That's where scalability happens. That's where everything gets predictable, right? Those two pillars are lands, which is everything around retention, onboarding, and customer experience. Cause if you go after all those new clients and then you can't keep them, you're a sales organization. You're not a startup. You're not a business. You're going to stay on the hamster wheel. You want to do that, go into real estate. That's fun. But if you're in startup, you're in technology, you want to scale, right? The very last one is my favorite because he's the underdog pillar. And this is called expands. If you've gone through the investments of time and resources to build awareness, build engagement, enable and retain clients, the job of this pillar is to make sure that you take all that data and understand how that happened. So two things can be true. Number one, you can now understand what else can you sell with your product or service portfolio, right? Let's take a barbershop. I got you in on a haircut, but did you know that we do male manicures too? I always use a barbershop because it's a really easy business model. As it applies to tech startups, I got you in at my widget number one. I want to sell you a widget A, B, and C, right? I don't know which one of those widgets are going to sell, but you know who's going to tell me before anybody else? Not the market. My customers are, because they already trust me. So I already got them out of the way. So in the expands pivot, you get to figure out, how can I expand that sale rather than an over obsessive focus on your CAC, the big buzzword, customer acquisition cost. Now I can focus on my CLV, my customer lifetime value, where the money happens, right? And once I can understand how that works, then I can apply all of that quantitative and qualitative data all the way back up to generating awareness, so I can get more of the type of customers who I know I can make aware, engage, sell with, keep, also spends more with me over their lifetime.
And just to underscore what you're saying here, it was only a couple of years back, Forrester came out with a big study that said that 73% of new annual revenue comes from existing customers. Like, it is a gold mine, right, of revenue. And is that the underpinning behind, because you talk about a change in a mindset, right? I can tell that's a big one. I talk to, C-suite leaders in, B2B companies all the time, and it is always focused on new logo development. Yet here's almost 3/4 of the revenue is coming from the existing, clients. They don't have the mindset. Is that the mindset, or is that something different when you talk about cultivating a revenue operations mindset?
I think it's different because the thing is I'm not a mindset coach, right? I go to church, I'm a Christian. So that's what gets my mindset together. Where the work really takes place is in the actual operation piece, which is why that word
Mm.
RevOps means so much, is you have to organize the operation. Because look, sales and marketing leaders know this as well as anybody. Uh, for example, your CMO seat, that is the highest turnover seat in the entire C-suite because of all the overwhelming expectations on that marketing body within the organization. Sales is quickly close behind because there's an enormous amount of pressure on sales and marketing to produce in a vacuum. But if sales and marketing, either or both, work together on an overarching revenue outcome, then they're going to have to, by default, tap into customer success data. They're going to have to tap into product data, and they're going to have to work together. But if the overall job of marketing is relegated to, oh, I just want to generate new leads. Okay, great. But then the next question is, okay, are these leads going to convert, right? And then it goes over scale, like how much did I close? And then it becomes a finger pointing session, right? Well, I couldn't close sales because you didn't generate me good leads. And I couldn't generate good leads because I don't know what's happening with customer success. And then product is building all of these new features and they don't know which ones are going to sell. So then not only does your revenue get stunted, but then your profitability. And that's the name of the game.
So, this idea of alignment, you know, to have a revenue operations engine, you have to have alignment internally. And we did a whole series, about 8 different episodes on why B2B CMOs fail so quickly.
Uh,
And CROs are right behind them. Alignment is one of the biggest issues, right? And so, a C-suite CMO versus a CRO has a quota that they got to live under, right? Very powerful motivating factor there, right? Where a CMO comes in and they're thinking about short-term and long-term objectives. They're thinking about pipeline development. They're also tasked to think about the brand and those trust issues, right? That we talked about at the beginning. In fact, there was a 3-time B2B CMO came on the podcast, and I just love this line. It's so simple. She said, today's brand is tomorrow's demand.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So the alignment, though, like the last thing you're going to do is go into a boardroom, right? Or you're, meeting with the private equity company that's just funded you and start talking about brand.
Well, that's the thing. It depends. It depends, Steve, on how you define it, right? because there are a lot of words in our industry like demand generation and lead generation. They get confused all the time. Let's admit it. The smartest of the smart, they use it interchangeably. Brand, the same thing, because brand can mean to somebody their visual identity, to another person, their content positioning, to another person, it's logo, right? So let us all get aligned on, and brands, for example, is going to mean very different things depending on which C-suite executives you're talking to. So in terms of what that word means and why it's become kind of diluted, I think it has a lot to do with the misalignment, right? Because sales isn't going to think of an investment in brand as very intelligent. The CFO also is not going to think about that in terms of, unless you have a really intelligent marketing person who says, okay, it's not one or the other. We need to build brand while we do these short-term things. And in RevOps Science, that's called the parallel growth plan, right? We can start building logos and stuff over here, and they might not matter right now, this quarter, you know, but that brand, that logo needs to sit in market for 4 quarters so we can get brand recognition. That way next year's sales outcome become better. Because now not only are we using that brand to recapture and upsell current clients who are nice and comfortable seeing that brand over 4 quarters, but now for the naysayers in the market that are referencing our brand resonance, and these are things that we can measure, now they have a reference. And these are things, brand is a very long-term play. Demand generation is also a very long-term play. And those priorities, metrics, and outcome need to be balanced with shorter-term plays. And it's usually the job of a very, very good CMO to communicate the difference between those initiatives to the rest of the season.
Yeah. And, I mean, the idea of brands is trust marks, right? And we don't have a pipeline that is robust without a strong and trusted brand, right? Which is why you talked about it at the very beginning, the partnership strategies, the different things that we can do, even as brand new companies, right? That we can do, even the PE firms that funded us, give us credibility, give us trust, create brand. Every executive is going to believe in those kinds of things. So I think what you just said there is really important, right? It's how the CMO or the head of marketing is really positioning that kind of a pillar, right? In the success strategy. No doubt about it. Now, one of the things that as marketers, we all know is that, we're supposed to be really good storytellers, and people remember things 22 times better when it's told in the form of a story. You've got a story around, call it an analogy, but you've got a story behind it. But thinking like a chef instead of a cook. I want to know what you mean by that and what the story is behind it.
I always man, because one of the things about me that I've been very public about is I never graduated college. So the way that my mind works and the language that I use and my thought process is different. And the easiest way for me to get everybody in the room on board is using very, very simple analogies. Sometimes I use barbershop. You brought up one of my other ones, which is the difference between a chef and a cook, is that titles matter. The difference between strategy and tactics matter. So in the context of the chef versus the cook situation, it's the difference between a CMO and what a CMO does and what your marketing director does. It's the difference between what your CRO does and what your top performing account executive does. Very different roles, very important parts of the bigger revenue operations model, right? So it matters who you hire and what they're deployed for. A CMO, typically, like myself included, don't put me in front of Facebook ads and expect to move the little widgets around and stuff like that. I'm looking at outcomes. I know what it's supposed to do. I don't know how it works. Same thing with a chef. A chef is going to make sure that the menu is done and all of this stuff, but he's not going to sit there and breathe over every cook's shoulder. He has to make sure that he trusts his team. So in terms of understanding within the revenue operation, the difference between and the relationship between strategy and tactics is paramount. Because hiring one marketing specialist and expecting him to be an expert in visual identity brands, and then social over here, and then strategy over there, and then lead generation over here, it's a formula. So each cook in a kitchen has a specific station. They report up to the chef. The chef's job is to taste all of the dishes that go out before it hits the customers and make sure that it's a taste. And when it's divided this way, the chef can know, oh, somebody at the salt station made this really salty. I know it's the salt person. Everything else is fine. But in this equation, in this marketing strategy equation, I know that that's the thing that was off and I could quickly correct that. Now, that individual may not have that seniority or foresight to be able to see all the other things that are at play, but that's really the job of that CMO or that CSO, that CRO, right? Like, I understand all of the ingredients that go in. I oversee them, right? I can't do it all. But once that final product comes to me, my job is to make sure that the overall results and outcomes are something that are going to produce the results that are going to make the CEO and his investors pleased.
We all have a part, there's a lot of discussion these days about retaining talent and those cooks. You can't be the chef without good cooks. And you need that team. You need that high performance team. And so, I kept thinking about that as you were talking about it, because it takes the team to create this kind of a success here. I wanted to go back to our original title here and just the idea of moving beyond the logo, right? Especially if a lot of people are on here thinking about startups is like, oh my gosh, I've barely got product market fit. I've got to get more customers, right? When does the mentality in your mind shift from I have to get new logos, I'm a startup, to focusing revenue operations back on existing customers? Like, when does that transition happen?
Got it. The answer is always going to be it depends. And I know people are going to hate me for saying that. Oh, here he goes. It depends. But it does, because that shift happens when that landing team or that CEO, and it can be an enterprise, right? Or a startup, well, understanding the difference between an opportunity and a priority. You can always do a logo. You have to ask yourself, it's an opportunity to build this logo, but is it a priority right now? Because the answer might not come to you. And if you can't say, why am I prioritizing this logo right now with an easy because timeline and metric that you're measuring, then it's not the right time to deploy that logo or the social ads or the creative or the rejiggering of the website or the position, one thing at a time. Everything has its place, because to me, growth is on a parallel track, but those parallel tracks are linear, right? They have to move forward. So if you have to constantly stop and start on things like logo, these are distractions, because it feels like you're getting something done. And then you have these big firms and these big CMOs that are really brand native and they know what to do. But as the leadership, as the CEO, you have to, or you don't have to do anything. But my recommendation is to ask for three things. Okay. Why is this a priority? In what amount of time? And what is the outcome going to be? If you want to do logo now, what data on our dashboard, right? Not in a conversation. I don't want feelings. I want facts. What data within our dashboard as a company, right, indicates to you that the solution right now is going to be to do a logo? And then if you can give me a really convincing answer, which you well can, I want to understand what your timeline is to get it done, your budget, and then taking another look at our dashboard, which of these numbers are going to move? Is it revenue? Okay, because I'm not that interested if it's not. What else is going to move, right? Is it going to be conversion? Is it going to be time spent on page? Drill down to me, because that's going to tell me where your strategic mind is. And if you're not being strategic about something like a logo, then that's not an investment of resources or working capital that needs to be made at that time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea of, as CMOs, we love to rebrand. I mean, doggone, I'm going to come in and this is somebody else's brand. This is somebody else's problem and I'm going to fix it. Right. But the brand is not the logo. The brand is not the color palette. And we spent so much time on that, the brand guidelines, the fonts, and making sure there's consistency. We need that. We need a consistency behind our brand. But I mean, I can go onto Fiverr and I can get for $20, I can get 5 incredible logos, right, that are coming out. I love your idea to focus on how is this going to lead to a revenue producing activity, right? That starts to separate our priorities because we have a limited amount of resources and we have been gifted those resources for a percentage of the company. We've been gifted those resources to use correctly. And it's one of the number one thing everybody's looking at is how are you utilizing those resources?
It's a capital efficiency. I mean, I'll tell you a story. We did at Successment, my own company. We've been in business since 2019, right? And I really do drink my own Kool-Aid here, Steve. So we've been in business since 2019, and I remember I literally, true story. I did a quick Google, went on to Fiverr after I understood what I wanted, and I paid for a logo for $7. And I've heard of not only when you're enterprise, you can afford to take all the time that you need. But I have heard of startups going through naming workshops and brand in the power. I don't know what it is, but that is just absolutely astronomical to me. If you're not an enterprise that can deal with different divisions, you should not be, and honestly, I think that's some of the branding firms that are out there, the kind of customers that they work with, they should really be ashamed of themselves because they should be responsible enough to sit there and say, you know what? This is the kind of project you need. That's not where you're at. This shouldn't be a priority right now. I'm going to put you on the calendar for such and such date or hit these goals and then come to us. Because if you sit there and I'm looking out for your business as a branding agency or as a branding CMO, what you need right now, you need a demand gen focused CMO, or you need a social focused CMO, or you need a lead gen focused CMO. You do not need to be thinking about a color palette when you have an investor meeting at the end of this quarter and you have quotas to meet. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. It really goes back to understanding priorities on the clock and the calendar and separating priorities from opportunity.
I had a CMO on the podcast yesterday. And one of the things that she said to me really, really made me think. And what she said is that our brand is to advocate for our clients. If they feel like, especially in the world of B2B, right, where we're chasing new logos and we're going to be in a relationship with them for many, 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 many months, right? And what they want to know is that we're going to help them. And in ways that transcend our tech or our services, right? That we get them, we understand them, we're going to help for them. And when she used that word advocate, right? And the reason why I bring it up right now is it's so far away from the mentality of I need to focus on a naming strategy, a logo development, a color palette, my fonts. It doesn't matter. You could have the best logo design in the world. You could have paid top dollar, right? But if you don't have a brand that is going to stand, that is going to create trust, that is going to advocate, that is going to be that Gartner trusted advisor, right? You should be spending that time thinking about how do I understand? How do I advocate? How do I support, right? Without selling my clients, right? Because once they know and trust you, we all do. So here's another question for you. We all agree this is a relationship-based business, right? So in the revenue operations model that you talk about, how do we help build that relationship?
Yeah, there are a couple of ways. One of the things that, everybody has a different personality. I'm very extroverted. I've worked with clients that are not extroverted. But one of the things that can't be understated in B2B is that a lot of B2B brands, they really do take themselves way too seriously. And just, I don't care what kind of personality or background you come from, don't be boring. Because, the era of the IBMs, they're gone. Nobody wants to stare at this giant logo and think it's going to come save them. People want to speak to people and people want to speak to people who understand who they are. One of the tactical areas that I've seen working really, really well with B2B is UGC, user generated content. And I'm confident that B2B brands tend to shy away from putting human beings behind their brands. They want to hide behind what you're talking about, the logos and the animations and the colors and the things that, and it's just like, I just want to see a person. And the superpower of a startup is that they are small. They can afford to generate content. They can afford to get on the phone. They can afford to speak to you and FaceTime and stuff. So one of the hacks that I've seen in terms of building trust isn't so much, and especially B2B, isn't so much like the case studies, although they do count, but it's really that user generated content. If you put it out there on social, people want to see where you are. If you're at a home office, be proud and say I'm at home office. If you're a team of 4 and you're up against an RFP with Gartner or, BGC or one of the big guys, and, you're up there and you're going against them, be proud that you're small and show them that you can do that. What that doesn't mean is discounting yourself to make yourself look small and omni-available. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for, if you're competing against a logo cannot compete against a person. So if you are the brand, if you are creating the content, and if you are interacting and being a human being instead of we were so pleased with our meeting and the following meeting will be scheduled for November 1st. We look forward to next steps. It's like, I'm so glad that I heard about your kid's cup game. I hope his team wins. Hope you get over that call by next week. We'll have such and such thing for you. We'll have it. Just be human, because people are going to feel like you're advocating for them because you're on the inside, versus trying to jump into a bigger firm that moves with the speed of the Titanic. People don't like that. In B2B, people really do value accuracy, but if you can give them accuracy and speed with personality, I think that goes an enormous way in terms of building that startup.
Well, here's what I know, Jonathan, is people are going to have questions, and we've covered a lot of territory here, but would it be appropriate if we gave out a link to, say, your LinkedIn profile? If people had questions, they could reach out to you?
Sure. I think I'm a pretty easy person to find. You can put my name into Google, Jonathan J. Mentor, or jonathanjmentor.co, and all of my stuff will pop out. All of my interviews and my speaking engagement and all of it, it'll just pop up. And you can just pick whatever channel you're going to find me on, and I'll answer.
Fantastic. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for coming on today and expanding one of the foundational things that when you and I were talking about, it's just this idea of not just chasing after logos, right? We have a gold mine within our companies, and it's called our customers. It's a gold mine to learn from them in order to sell to new logos. It's a gold mine to how do we cross-sell and upsell, because we understand them so well, we know how to add more value, right? It's not cross-selling, upselling just for the sake of cross-selling and upselling. We have to continue to add value. And the way that we define value isn't through our own meetings, it's through the voice of our customers, right? So just wanted to say thank you, because this is an opportunity to have us all kind of think differently. And you did that today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was a real pleasure.